Look around you, wherever you are right now. The people, the buildings, the trees outside the window, the birds, the insects, every living thing you can see, and the billions you can't. All of it, the entire web of life on this planet, is here because of a single unbroken thread of survival stretching back almost 4 billion years. Life began once on Earth, as far as we can tell, and it has never stopped since. But that thread has very nearly been cut. Not once, but 5 times. 5 times in the history of this planet, something went so catastrophically wrong that the great majority of all living things were wiped out, almost overnight in geological terms. Not a bad century, not a regional disaster. 5 separate occasions, when the door very nearly closed on life itself, when the planet came within a hair of being scrubbed clean and left barren. We call them the Big 5 mass extinctions. And the strangest, most unsettling thing about them is how different each one was. Different killers, different victims, different weapons. Poison, fire, ice, and worse. You exist because life squeezed through all 5 of these disasters, every single time, by the narrowest of margins. If any one of them had been just a little worse, there would be no forests, no animals, no you. So what were they? What came so close to ending everything? And what does it tell us that life on Earth has stared into the abyss not once, but 5 separate times and crawled back every time? To find out, we have to walk through the 5 worst chapters in the history of the living world. And by the end, you may never look at the survival of life the same way again. Before we go back, a quick word. If you're new here, this is a channel about the deep history of our restless planet, the disasters and lost worlds buried in the rock beneath us. If that sounds like your kind of thing, the single most useful thing you can do is hit subscribe. It genuinely helps a new channel more than you'd think, and you won't miss what comes next. Right. Let's go back and meet the 5 times life almost ended. First, a quick word on how we even know any of this happened. We know because of the rocks and the fossils trapped inside them. If you could cut a clean slice down through the layers of the Earth's crust, you would be reading a diary. The deeper you go, the further back in time you travel, layer by layer, each one a page. And as you read down through that diary, you find the fossils of living things changing and multiplying as life evolves. But at 5 specific points in that record, something jarring happens. The fossils, rich and varied one moment, suddenly vanish. Whole groups of creatures that fill the rock below are simply gone in the rock above, replaced by emptiness or by the few survivors. These 5 sudden cliffs in the fossil record are the fingerprints of the 5 great mass extinctions. They are the moments the diary nearly went blank. Let's walk through them, from the oldest to the most recent. The first nearly ended life around 440 million years ago, in a time called the Ordovician. To picture this world, you have to forget the land entirely. There were no plants on land yet, no animals, nothing but bare rock. All the action, all the life, was in the sea. And the seas were astonishingly rich. They teemed with strange and beautiful creatures, trilobites scuttling across the seabed, corals building early reefs, and countless others in warm, shallow oceans spread across the globe. Life was thriving. And then the planet turned on it. The cause appears to have been a sudden and dramatic plunge into an ice age. The climate cooled hard and fast. Great ice sheets spread across the southern lands, and as that water was locked up in ice, sea levels dropped around the world. The warm, shallow coastal seas where most life lived simply drained away, vanishing as the coastlines shifted. And then, just as life was reeling, the ice retreated again. The seas came flooding back, swinging the whole system violently the other way. Caught between the freeze and the flood, an estimated 85% of all species in the oceans were wiped out. It was the first time life on Earth came close to the edge, but it would not be the last. The second disaster struck slowly, over a long and troubled stretch around 375 million years ago in the Late Devonian. By now, the world had changed. Plants had finally conquered the land, spreading green across the continents for the very first time. And the seas were dominated by fish, so much so that this period is sometimes called the Age of Fishes. Huge armored predators ruled the oceans. Life had grown bolder and more complex than ever before. This extinction is the strangest and most debated of the 5, because it wasn't a single sharp blow, but a drawn-out crisis, a series of pulses of death spread across millions of years. The oceans especially suffered. Again and again, the seas seemed to have lost their oxygen, becoming stagnant and suffocating, with vast dead zones where little could survive. One suspected culprit is, surprisingly, those new land plants. As they spread and grew roots, they may have transformed the soil and washed huge amounts of nutrients into the seas, triggering the kind of runaway blooms that strip water of its oxygen. Life on land, it seems, may have helped poison the life in the sea. By the time it was over, around 3/4 of all species were gone. The reefs that had flourished for millions of years collapsed and would not fully recover for a very long time. And then came the worst, the third extinction, the one scientists simply call the Great Dying. Around 252 million years ago, at the end of a period called the Permian, life on Earth came closer to total annihilation than at any other moment in its entire history. This was not a near miss like the others. This was the abyss itself. By the most widely cited estimates, around 90% of all species on Earth, in the sea and on the land, were wiped out. 9 in 10. Life was reduced to a shadow of itself, and the planet very nearly became a dead world. The cause was a catastrophe almost beyond imagining. In what is now Siberia, the Earth's crust tore open, and for hundreds of thousands of years, one of the largest volcanic events in the planet's history poured out. We call it the Siberian Traps. This was not a single eruption, but an ongoing wound in the planet, flooding an area the size of a continent with lava and pumping staggering quantities of carbon dioxide and toxic gases into the atmosphere. The result was a cascade of disasters, each feeding the next. The climate lurched into severe and rapid warming. The oceans heated up, lost their oxygen, and turned acidic. In places, the seas may have filled with poisonous hydrogen sulfide. It was a planet-wide chemical and climate catastrophe, set off by fire from within the Earth. And it so very nearly finished life for good. The recovery took millions of years. Life had survived, but only just, and it would carry the scars of the Great Dying for a long, long time. The fourth extinction came around 201 million years ago, at the end of the Triassic. In the aftermath of the Great Dying, life had slowly rebuilt itself into new forms. Among the survivors and newcomers were the early dinosaurs, sharing the world with many other groups of reptiles, some of them large and formidable rivals. The stage seemed set for any number of these creatures to inherit the Earth. And then once again, the planet convulsed. The likely trigger was familiar, another enormous outpouring of volcanic activity, this time as the supercontinent Pangaea began to tear itself apart, splitting along the seams that would eventually open the Atlantic Ocean. The eruptions again flooded the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, driving sharp climate change and acidifying the oceans. Around half of all species vanished, but this extinction did something with lasting consequences. By clearing away so many of the dinosaurs' competitors, those rival reptile groups, it left the world wide open. And into that emptied world stepped the dinosaurs, who would go on to dominate the planet for the next 130 million years. One group's catastrophe was another's opportunity. That is a pattern we will see one final time, because the fifth extinction is the most famous of them all. Around 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous, the age of the dinosaurs came to a sudden and violent end. For over 100 million years, the dinosaurs had ruled. They had filled nearly every role on land, from towering plant eaters to enormous predators. They were, by any measure, one of the most successful groups of animals the planet had ever produced. And then, in what may have been a single terrible day, their world ended. An asteroid, around 10 kilometers across, slammed into what is now the Gulf of Mexico, near the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy beyond comprehension, throwing enormous quantities of rock and dust high into the atmosphere. Wildfires may have raged across continents. And then came the long darkness, as dust and soot blotted out the sun, plunging the world into a cold, dim winter that choked off the plants at the base of the food chain. It is likely that the planet was already under stress from yet another bout of massive volcanism in India at the time, a 1-2 punch of impact and eruption. Whatever the precise combination, around 3/4 of all species died, and every dinosaur, except for one lucky group, was gone. That one lucky group was the birds. Every bird alive today, every sparrow and eagle and pigeon, is a living dinosaur, the descendants of the few that survived the impact winter. The dinosaurs never fully died. They are still here, singing in the trees outside your window. And their fall cleared the way for another group of survivors, small, unremarkable creatures that had been living in the shadows for over 100 million years. The mammals. With the dinosaurs gone, the mammals finally inherited the world, and from them, in time, came us. So step back and look at the whole sweep of it. 5 times, life on Earth was brought to the very edge of oblivion, by ice and falling seas, by suffocating, poisoned oceans, by a continent of fire that nearly ended everything, by the breaking apart of the world itself, and by a mountain falling from the sky. 5 completely different catastrophes, 5 different ways for a world to nearly die, and 5 times, against everything, life held on. Not untouched, never untouched. Each time the survivors were a fraction of what came before, and the world that emerged was utterly transformed. But life itself, that single unbroken thread, was never quite severed. And here is the thought worth holding on to. You are standing at the end of that thread. Every one of your ancestors, going back 4 billion years, through every single one of those 5 catastrophes, survived. Not one of them died before passing on life. Through the ice, through the poison, through the fire, through the asteroid winter, your lineage made it, every time, by the narrowest of margins. The odds against that are almost beyond imagining. And yet, here you are, the living proof that life on Earth has stared into the abyss 5 times, and 5 times refused to fall in. The story of life is not a story of safety. It is a story of survival, against catastrophe after catastrophe, and it is still being written with you in it. You've been watching Ashfall Earth. If this changed the way you think about the survival of life on Earth, consider subscribing, and we'll take you back even further next time.